everyone. Welcome to another Overrated Film Saturday, and today I thought it'd be interesting to briefly dive into a film that I sort of kind of grew up with as a child, only because it was relatively popular when it came out, and it's one that I've sort of explored throughout my youth, even though obviously now I sort of see a lot of the flaws that are sort of presented within the film. And I thought it'd be interesting to explore this one today because even though I still kind of genuinely like this film, even though it's obviously not one of the best films out there or one of the best films that is sort of like this out there, it still kind of manages to do some interesting things, but then it also suffers from a lot of problems. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about this one today. And that, as you can see by the title as well as thumbnail, is Free Willy. Now, from my understanding, this came out in the 90s, and um, it sort of has sort of similar beats to other films that were kind of coming around during this time period and that have come around in previous time periods. And that has to do with the relationship between a child and a sort of pet. It could be a dog, it could be even an alien in some cases, E.T. being a perfect example. And in this case, Willy is a whale, and Jesse is the orphan boy that ends up bonding with Willy. And you'll sort of see how this sort of comes about if you choose to watch the film. But the reason why in which this film I think is a little bit overrated is by the fact that it's obviously doing a lot of things that other films have done that tried to center at least around this kind of a concept. And again, it's not necessarily that I mind the cliches. Obviously, cliches I think are totally fine. It's just how sort of you utilize them. And here I don't think they're as utilized to their full potential as some other films that have come and gone over the years that have really honed in on this whole aspect of a child bonding with another entity. And not only is this based within the not as well executed portion of its premise, it's also the villain that's involved, because the villain within this film is sort of sabotaging Willy at one point for money. And this is the kind of standard cliche that we see oftentimes with a lot of these kinds of villains. They're not given that much thought or heart, really. They're just very robotic and kind of have this sort of standard one-dimensional approach to them. And again, I think that's definitely something in particular within this plot that doesn't lend itself well and really drags the film down, because if you want to make a bond between the child and the entity, and you want the villain to somehow conflict with that bond, you kind of have to do it in a way that's sort of a little bit smarter than the way they approach it, which is, I just want to kill this whale for money. And you'll sort of see the reasoning behind it if you choose to watch the film. Now, another thing that, again, I don't think works too well, unfortunately, and I sort of see this more as I get older, is the orphan character named Jesse, who ends up bonding with the whale. Jesse kind of has his flaws, and I sort of understand why he would have these behavioral problems that he does. But I felt like that he kind of, doesn't really develop as much out of them. I almost felt the most developed that he gets is really just doing something for the whale, Willy. but not really beyond his own understanding, at least to his adopted or at least a adopted family, so to speak, because he does get adopted relatively within the beginning of the film. And it would have been nice had he given a little bit more, been given a little bit more time with them as well, instead of just with the whale, because it's obvious that he's done a lot wrong to the family that has adopted him. And, you know, it would have been nice had there been some kind of, you know, way in which the family could have been given a lot stronger, I guess, ending, so to speak. Like, you know, Jesse goes out of his way to do something for one of the family members within his adopted family. And in this case, it's a mom and a dad that sort of are a guy and his wife, you know, who adopt Jesse and therefore become sort of his mom and dad, really. So again, that angle seems to be a huge portion that's missing within this film, and it obviously would have, I think, led itself a whole lot better had they had some kind of honest sort of development, which unfortunately they don't. And we're supposed to just go along and just sympathize with Jesse the entire time, even though, you know, you really kind of want him at some points to take a little bit of the higher ground and, you know, kind of live up to his mistakes. And I don't think this film really did a really good job of showcasing him sort of, you know, living up to the mistakes that he's made. So I think that's something that could have been explored more within this film that they didn't, that they chose not to explore. So yeah, that kind of brings the film down a little. And also, just the whole way in which the film's kind of structured, as far as, you know, Willy being eventually set free, the whale, because the whale is in a sort of this theme park, so to speak, and eventually you'll see how the whale is set free. They almost kind of give it away within the title what really happens to the whale, but it would have been a lot better to at least have some kind of logical explanation as to how the whale kind of gets free, and you'll sort of see how the logic kind of doesn't end up suiting itself well and is done sort of more for an emotional grandeur rather than any rational reasoning behind it. And I think that's something that's a little bit, again, it's something that just ends up being a little bit more hokey, and an area that I think definitely could have been improved upon as well. So it's not necessarily that this film is horrible by any stretch of the imagination. There are a lot worse films that I've definitely have been exposed to over the years, but I'd say this one did, I think, get a little bit too much praise for what it really was. And I think the problems that I mentioned are really the problems that could have lended itself to being a whole lot better than it actually ended up being. Now, the reason why I think this film got a significant amount of hype, at least around my childhood, was the fact that Michael Jackson did a song for this film. And it actually is a pretty decent song, to be honest. And the thing is that it obviously allows you to really emphasize your film when you can get someone as big as Michael Jackson to be a part of the whole process. And so I think, you know, that within and of itself was, I think, enough for this film to be sold to people. And for people to kind of get behind the whole message, even though the message has been done before to to different extents over the years. But I think that's really all I can say about it. I mean, again, it's not one that I would say is horrible by any stretch, and it's not really that it's uh, bad per se. It's just kind of lackluster as far as these kinds of films are concerned when we have a kid supposedly bonding with another entity, usually an animal, but again, it could be something else too. For example, E.T. But yeah, it's just one that's not as strongly crafted. Uh, and you can sort of see that hinted really well throughout once you start looking into sort of a lot of the flaws that exist. Um, and again, it could have definitely though been a whole lot worse, but at the same time, I think it kind of got a little bit too much hype for its overall value. But I think that's really ultimately all I can say though about this film. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.